The Manhattan Project core team combined military command under Leslie Groves and scientific direction under Robert Oppenheimer at Los Alamos. Their mission was to turn abstract nuclear physics into a deployable weapon. They accomplished this in under 3 years during World War II. In December 1942, the first controlled, self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction occurred at Chicago Pile 1. That single moment proved that atomic bombs were no longer science fiction. Humanity had quietly moved into a new physical reality where chain reactions could scale to city-killing levels. The theory became tangible. Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 killed well over 100,000 people and forced Japan's surrender. But the deeper shift was psychological. Every major power now had to plan for wars where one mistake could erase an entire city in minutes. The military calculations that had governed conflict for thousands of years became obsolete overnight. The project's success didn't create a monopoly, it triggered an arms race. The Soviet Union, Britain, and later others followed the Manhattan template. Secret labs, crash programs, massive state funding. Science became permanently tied to national survival. Manhattan became the blueprint for big science as a concept. National labs, classified mega projects, and the idea that a small inner circle of experts could rewire global politics from inside fenced-off compounds became the new normal. After 1945, the United States didn't dismantle the infrastructure. It kept the project's organizational skeleton running to conduct test series like Operation Crossroads and build the nuclear navy. Nuclear weapons weren't treated as temporary wartime expedients. They became permanent infrastructure. The real lethality wasn't the bombs themselves. It was what they made every future great power crisis become. A coin flip between diplomacy and extinction. Nuclear weapons went from being a one-time war ender to a standing doomsday option that would never go away. If you're finding this breakdown valuable, subscribe to the channel. We analyze military strategy, history, and the hidden forces that shape global power. New videos drop weekly. Each Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine carries up to 20 Trident 2D5 submarine-launched ballistic missiles. Each missile carries multiple warheads. A single boat's loadout can exceed the explosive power of all bombs used in World War II combined. The 14 ballistic missile Ohio-class submarines form the sea-based leg of the U.S. nuclear triad. They're specifically optimized for second strike survival. Their entire mission is to ensure retaliation remains possible even if the American homeland is devastated in a first strike. Crews are small, about 15 officers and 140 enlisted personnel, roughly 155 people total. They're split into blue and gold teams, rotating 70 to 90-day deterrent patrols. The submarine and its apocalyptic payload almost never come off station. Their lethality comes from invisibility. Once submerged, these boats disappear into the ocean. Adversaries must assume they are always present and always capable of responding. This assumption hard locks nuclear planning into mutual assured destruction. There's no scenario where a surprise attack can neutralize the threat completely. The crew's daily routine looks mundane. Maintenance, drills, watch rotations. But every procedure is built around one premise. If an order comes, there are only minutes to make a decision that could end millions of lives. The psychological weight of that responsibility is carried by a handful of people most of the world will never know about. Because of their survivability, adversaries know a decapitating first strike cannot prevent counterattack. This discourages use it or lose it thinking, but it also locks the world into permanent nuclear stalemate. The paradox is straightforward. The safer these boats are from detection, the more stable deterrence becomes. But the more total the consequences if their restraint ever fails. Human survival depends on the restraint of these crews, not their aggression, their discipline in doing nothing. Qaeda, which means bayonet, is believed to be the Mossad directorate specializing in covert assassinations and sabotage. Teams usually deploy 3 to 6 operators to eliminate individuals whose survival is seen as a direct path to war or mass casualty attacks. The classic case study is the post-Munich 1972 operation against Black September operatives. Small teams tracked targets across Europe and the Middle East for years. The message was clear: orchestrating Israeli civilian deaths carried a long, personal shadow. The operation wasn't about revenge in the emotional sense. It was about establishing a cost structure that changed the calculus for future planners. In 2008, a car bombing in Damascus killed Hezbollah commander Imad Mugnieh. The operation is widely attributed to Israel with U.S. assistance. Mugnieh's removal disrupted an entire portfolio of bombings, kidnappings, and external operations. Taking out a single planner dismantled years of work. Targeted killings of Iranian nuclear scientists in the 2000s used magnetic bombs on cars and precision shootings in Tehran streets. The goal was to slow Iran's nuclear program without declaring war. City commutes became a psychological battlefield. Engineers and scientists had to factor personal elimination into their career choices. Kaidan operations prioritized deniability over spectacle. Unmarked poison, staged accidents, clean exits that may never be officially acknowledged, but are loudly understood by rival services and militant groups. The strategic effect goes beyond the deaths themselves. Engineers, financiers, and logisticians in hostile networks quietly reduce their willingness to drive escalation when they know personal consequences are on the table. Their lethality lives in the futures that never materialize. Bombings not planned. Technologies not completed. Coalitions that never form because key nodes vanished at the wrong time. They don't kill armies, they kill momentum. During the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, Joint Special Operations Command created task forces that fused Delta Force, SEALs, Rangers, intelligence analysts, and drone feeds into single kill capture machines. These units cycled targets night after night. The strike cells industrialized the process. One raid generated laptops, phones, and human intelligence that fed analysis cells. Those analysis cells produced the next night's target deck. The enemy leadership's life expectancy compressed to weeks or days. In Iraq, Task Force 714 under Stan McChrystal became notorious for raiding multiple high-value targets in a single night. They systematically dismantled al-Qaeda in Iraq's mid- and upper-level leadership faster than the organization could regenerate. Operations that killed Abu Musab al-Zarqawi in 2006 and later, helped locate Osama bin Laden, showed how a handful of operators, backed by a massive intelligence apparatus, could decapitate organizations that once required full-scale invasions to confront. The method reshaped global counterterrorism doctrine. Night raids, intelligence fusion centers, biometric databases, and pattern-of-life analysis became standard tools for dismantling networks, rather than occupying territory. For insurgent leaders, the effect was psychological suffocation. Phones turned into homing beacons. Safe houses became traps. Any meeting became a potential last appearance. Trust and continuity inside their movements fractured. The organizational memory that allowed these groups to learn, adapt, and pass knowledge between generations was repeatedly erased. These units don't defeat forces in the traditional sense. They erase continuity. A movement can survive on paper, but the experience link between past and future gets wiped out. That's a different kind of lethality. During the Cold War, Soviet Spetsnaz units trained for deep infiltration into NATO territory before or at the opening of war. Missions included sabotage of nuclear weapons sites, air bases, and command and control nodes. These teams were often expected to operate with near-zero chance of extraction. Their purpose wasn't survival. It was to blind, delay, or fracture NATO decision-making in the critical first hours of a nuclear crisis. Training and planning envisioned attacks on communication lines, radar facilities, logistics hubs, and leadership bunkers. Western planners had to divert massive resources into guarding what used to be the rear. That distinction between front and rear effectively collapsed. The mere possibility that pre-positioned or rapidly infiltrated Spetsnaz could sabotage nuclear command centers pushed NATO toward more redundant, hardened, and automated systems. Ironically, this made some launch decisions more rigid. Western doctrine and exercises began to assume internal disruption at the moment of maximum external pressure. Air defenses, nuclear storage sites, and political leaderships in Europe had to be protected under the assumption that the infrastructure could implode from within at the worst possible time. Their lethality lived mostly on paper and in war plans. Small teams whose anticipated sacrifice forced an entire alliance to restructure its defensive posture. They were built to ensure escalation, not to ensure their own survival. Bletchley Park's cryptanalysts turned intercepted Axis radio traffic into ultra-intelligence by breaking systems like the German Enigma and Lorenz ciphers. Allied leaders gained access to enemy plans that were supposed to be mathematically unreadable. In the Battle of the Atlantic, Ultra allowed Allied navies to reroute convoys away from U-boat wolf packs. Shipping losses dropped sharply. Britain stayed supplied with food, fuel, and American reinforcements. Without that intelligence, the war in Europe could have taken a very different path. During North African campaigns, decrypts revealed German logistics and intentions. Montgomery could outmaneuver Rommel. Desert battles that might have become attritional slogs turned into more controlled engagements. Ultra-intelligence contributed to the planning and deception surrounding D-Day by confirming whether German commanders were buying Allied ruses. Adjustments could be made in real time as the invasion unfolded. Some historians estimate Ultra shortened the war in Europe by as much as 2 years. Preventing disasters and optimizing offensives indirectly saved millions of lives that would have been lost in prolonged fighting and occupation. The entire operation remained secret for decades. Veterans couldn't publicly claim that their desk work had killed more enemy plans than many frontline units killed enemy soldiers. Their lethality was invisible but enormous. They killed surprise itself. The Axis lost the fog of war advantage that commanders had historically relied on. When your enemy knows what you're planning before you execute, the advantage collapses. CIA Special Activities Division. Paramilitary officers were central to the 2001 Afghanistan operation. Small teams inserted alongside the Northern Alliance used cash, airstrikes, and local alliances to collapse Taliban control within weeks. Conventional U.S. divisions weren't initially on the ground. A handful of operatives coordinated the effort. These teams specialize in operating under diplomatic cover or none at all. They blend intelligence work with direct action, recruiting guerrillas, calling in air power, orchestrating campaigns that never formally count as wars. Historic coups and regime change efforts used small CIA-backed teams to organize local units, psychological operations, and limited violence that toppled governments, while Washington maintained distance. The 1953 Iranian coup and the 1954 Guatemalan coup both followed this model. In Central America and elsewhere during the Cold War, paramilitary officers trained and supplied proxy forces. They shaped who held power in entire regions while the U.S. officially remained short of open invasion. The Afghanistan model became a template later echoed in Iraq and Syria. Small advisory or covert cells amplified local fighters into regime-altering forces. The unintended consequences are equally lethal. Many operations produced long-term instability, insurgencies, or blowback. Armed factions and war economies persisted after the original mission ended. These teams decide who gets a second chance at power and who disappears. They draw new political maps long after the shooting stops. The wars they start don't always end when they leave. Western investigations link GRU Unit 29155 to a string of operations across Europe. Attempted assassinations of Bulgarian arms dealer Emilian Gebrev in 2015. A failed coup attempt in Montenegro in 2016. The 2018 Novichok poisoning of ex-GRU officer Sergei Skripal in the UK. The Skripal attack used a military-grade nerve agent in a British town. Public spaces became contaminated. A massive diplomatic crisis followed, along with expulsions. Moscow proved it was willing to use battlefield chemistry in a peacetime city. The Montenegro plot allegedly aimed to storm parliament and assassinate the prime minister to derail the country's NATO accession. The unit's remit includes preventing geopolitical realignments through covert action. Bellingcat and partners traced multiple officers from the same unit to trips linked with destabilization campaigns in Crimea, Moldova, and Catalonia. The pattern suggests small teams moving around Europe to magnify political fractures. Analysts note that many of these operations were sloppy enough to be exposed. That might serve a purpose. Blatant traces send a deterrent message to defectors and governments about the costs of crossing Moscow. Their lethality isn't battlefield victory. It's the constant erosion of trust and stability. European states have to treat normal politics and civil spaces as potential fronts in an undeclared war. The goal isn't to win, it's to make stability impossible. Russian strategic rocket forces and their analogs in China and North Korea consist of small launch crews who stand guard over land-based missiles capable of delivering nuclear warheads across continents in under an hour. These crews operate on tight, rehearsed procedures. If higher authorities transmit valid launch orders, they have minutes to authenticate, unlock, and execute commands that cannot be recalled once the missiles leave their silos or mobile launchers. The mere existence of survivable land-based missiles forces adversaries to maintain early warning satellites, radars, and nuclear command systems on hair-trigger alert. The risk that false alarms could escalate toward catastrophe increases. In North Korea's case, even a small and relatively crude nuclear missile force gives Pyongyang disproportionate leverage. It allows them to demand concessions, resist sanctions, and trade military cooperation for aid or technology. These forces underpin national doctrines of deterrence. States rely on them to prevent invasion or regime change. They become central to decisions about war and peace, even when they never fire a shot. Their lethality is measured in the psychological and diplomatic weight of the option they hold. Every negotiation over sanctions, borders, or alliances happens under the shadow of a handful of crews with launch keys. Stuxnet was a highly sophisticated malware campaign that targeted Iran's Natanz uranium enrichment facility. The code subtly altered the speed of centrifuge rotors while feeding normal readouts to operators. Damage looked like a mysterious mechanical failure. Technical analyses suggest Stuxnet caused Iran to decommission and replace roughly 1,000 IR-1 centrifuges between late 2009 and early 2010. That's about 10% of the machines then operating. Enrichment progress slowed significantly without an airstrike. The code exploited multiple zero-day vulnerabilities and embedded deep knowledge of Siemens industrial controllers. This implied a small, elite team with access to both cyber talent and detailed intelligence on Natanz's hardware. Unlike traditional sabotage, the attack left no cratered buildings on TV. It simply degraded performance and caused breakdowns. Iran's program stumbled under its own apparent technical problems. Strategically, Stuxnet demonstrated that cyber weapons could produce real-world physical destruction against hardened nuclear sites. It redefined what first strikes could look like in future conflicts. The operation also normalized state use of offensive cyber capabilities. Rivals were encouraged to build their own arsenals of digital tools that can target power grids, pipelines, and infrastructure far from any battlefield. Their lethality is the template they left behind. Invisible tools that can quietly break the machines a society depends on, long before anyone declares war. Einsatzgruppen were mobile killing squads composed largely of SS and police personnel. They followed the German army into occupied Eastern Europe with explicit orders to identify and kill Jews, Roma, political commissars, and other targeted groups. They operated outside conventional frontline combat. They entered towns behind the advancing Wehrmacht, rounded up civilians, marched them to ravines or fields, and shot them into mass graves. Operations sometimes wiped out entire communities in days. Massacres like Babi Yar near Kiev saw over 33,000 Jews murdered in 2 days. Small, organized units with rifles and support staff carried out genocide at industrial tempos without gas chambers or camps. Local collaborators, often recruited as auxiliary police from Ukrainian, Latvian, or Lithuanian populations, expanded the squad's reach. Ordinary civic structures became tied into the machinery of murder. The Einsatzgruppen model proved how bureaucracy, paperwork, and special duty squads could normalize mass executions as administrative tasks. This paved the way for later, more mechanized killing centers. Their lethality is moral and institutional. They showed how fast a modern state can convert regular officers and civil servants into an extermination system when ideology and orders demand it. Perimeter, nicknamed Dead Hand, is an automatic or semi-automatic nuclear control system designed in the late Cold War. Its purpose is to ensure that if Soviet leadership were destroyed in a first strike, remaining command bunkers could still trigger a full retaliatory launch. The system monitors a mix of inputs: military communications, sensors for blast, radiation, and seismic activity. If it detects an apparent decapitating attack, plus loss of contact with top commanders, it can authorize a special command missile launch. That command missile's payload isn't a warhead. It's a radio transmitter that broadcasts launch orders to dispersed missile forces as it flies over Russian territory. This bypasses destroyed command infrastructure. Human operators in hardened bunkers still play a role. In crises, leadership can switch on perimeter, delegating final authority to whoever is manning the system if communications die. This reduces the time window for considered political judgment. The system was built to strengthen deterrence by guaranteeing retaliation. But it also means false readings or technical glitches in the worst possible moment could, in theory, cascade into civilization-ending launches. The control team's job is to maintain and, when ordered, activate a machine whose very existence assumes that a world-ending exchange is not just possible but worth automating. Their lethality is unique. They sit at the intersection where human fear hands final decisions about survival to algorithms and pre-planned checklists.